Hello there and welcome to Golf Lovers United, where we discuss golf the fair way. My name is Mark at GolfDadUK on Twitter and other socials, and today we've got one of the best interviews within the golf industry of 2023 as my fantastic co-hosts Ben at Golf Lover UK and Jay at Pro Golf Critic interview the wonderful Bob Ball, investor, private equity expert, and golf analyst, commentator, and self-professed industry geek. This is one of the best interviews that I've ever heard in the golf industry because we talk about not only the future of the professional game, but we talk about why we've ended up here. We talk about, of course, the Premier Golf League. We talk about the PGA PIF merger. We talk about so much more, how the media helps to shape the future of professional golf. And it's such an important interview. So I'm really excited to bring this to you today. Jay and Ben put this together whilst I was on vacation, and it couldn't have come out better. So well done to those guys for such an amazing, wide-ranging, deep dive interview. But before I take you in there, what I need to do is give a shout out to our fantastic new Fan Zone members. John Erickson joins us as a Fan Zone member, and we welcome at LIV Golf 54 as our first ever GLU brand ambassador. If you want to become a brand ambassador, if you want to have your say and ask our guests your questions, you can do the very same thing over at glugc.com/support. Tell your friends about this. Tell them that they can listen to the audio-only version of this in their podcast app of choice. And if you want more, head to glugc.com. In the meantime, enjoy this superb interview with the one, the only, Mr. Bob Ball.
In July last year, it was a few weeks after the merger. Conversations had first been launched, and you put up a tweet about a message to all of the players, all the PGA Tour players, and it was basically sort of a heartfelt. You wrote it from what was a very informative point of view, with your background being an investor, being involved in private equity, being involved in the legal side of both of those as well as the financial side. But it was a heartfelt message to the players. And what was just a normal Twitter post, a long one and a good one, ended up being retweeted by a certain Phil Mickelson, and then by about 10 other tour players and players in the world of golf. And I just checked now and it's got over 5 million views. So you put out a tweet and all of a sudden you're now the go-to man, and you've recently done a 3-parter on the players involved in the merger. So Bob, just tell us very quickly, you pressed send and then what happened?
Well, one, I was not a prolific Twitter user. So I had just decided to start kind of figuring out how to use it. And the notifications were on. So every time somebody liked like a tweet or something, my phone was dinging and buzzing. So it was a Sunday evening, I think. And I wrote it, and we could talk about how I got there, a while. But when I wrote it, I was actually going to bed, and I usually go to bed pretty early, and I'm an early riser. So I wrote it and sort of put my phone down and didn't really think about it, and really didn't think, I didn't know how many people would, look at it. I went to bed, and I don't know why I didn't hear it before then, but in the middle of the night, my damn phone was buzzing, it was dinging, and I got up and I'm like, what the heck? And I couldn't figure out, I didn't know, I was trying to get inside of Twitter. It was going crazy, and I was getting inside of Twitter to try to figure out how to stop it. And I didn't realize that you have to do that from your iPhone. So it was literally buzzing and dinging all night. And I looked at it, and I think it was somewhere, several hundred, maybe even 400,000 people had already viewed it and were liking it, were commenting on it. And I was like, oh my God. So I ended up putting my phone in my closet to go back to sleep because I couldn't get it to stop. And so the next morning I got up, and I can't remember if it was right away in the morning. I actually think it was first thing in the morning. I looked at it again, and it had really blown up, and it was because Phil Mickelson had retweeted it. And I was utterly shocked by that. And so I I was really stunned, and it had gone from that 400,000, it was up in, over 1 million plus, by that time. And so, it was interesting for sure. That had never happened to me before.
And look, it's happened again since, a slightly lesser scale, but still with your 3 players in the game. And we'll talk about that. And I know we'll ask loads of questions, but I want to let Jay get in here, because I know that you mentioned the phrase. I'll come on to how I wrote it, but if we said, look, you're an investor, you do private equity, you were part of a computer startup which built the very first piece of software for realtors, all that type of thing. But that's very different, isn't it, Jay, to writing an article which basically was heartfelt and investigative almost into the merger. What did you think of it, Jay? And then obviously, Bob, how did you write it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that's been one of the great things that's sort of come out of everything in the past year and a half in the golf world, is the fact that I've called myself sort of a citizen journalist, because it's gotten to the point in the golf media, the more corporate golf media, where like they weren't talking about the real story behind LIV like almost at all. It was so clear to me sort of what was going on that like I felt the need to comment, to basically put all of my thoughts down on paper and sort of create an article that talked about, everything going on that like nobody else was really talking about. And I felt like that sort of created this space on social media for independent folks like myself and Bob to sort of come in and sort of really supply something that fans were really looking for. Like, fans of golf really want to know like more about what's actually going on, rather than this sort of spin that's sort of going on in the corporate media that we all know is very, very tied to the PGA Tour and the golf establishment. I think that much has been very, very clear from the beginning, and this has been sort of it's been an eyebrow raising thing for me, this whole process. So I think, Bob, you kind of had a similar experience, just sort of given your background and your aptitude for, just being able to tap into the ether when it comes to kind of how some of these investments work, like the business of sport, the business of golf. Like, I feel like you've had some really, really great insights that, I mean, frankly, the golf media is not really even qualified to talk about.
Well, what's interesting, what actually brought me to LIV Golf was I'd heard about it. I thought, well, that's a great idea. That'll be fun and interesting, and it's something new. And actually what brought me to it was my experience in politics. Here in Portland, I've been involved in a number of campaigns. Our last governor, she left office now, but I was the chair of her finance committee, for her election. I've done ballot measures here in the city of Portland. And when you're in a big city and you're involved in the political sphere, if you will, you learn some things. And what, LIV had come out, and I thought it was great. And I was excited that it was coming to Portland. It was going to be the stop. And I was watching, I had felt that the players, the things that were being said about them, were unfair, just from a surface view, but I wasn't really heavily invested in it. But what really got me invested in is when they came to Pumpkin Ridge, Portland was their first U.S. stop, essentially. I don't know if you remember, there was London, then Portland. And when they came here, there were protesters outside of Pumpkin Ridge. And I'm like, wait a minute. I know enough about politics. I'm in the investment world, and I read the Wall Street Journal every day. And they were protesting PIF's investment, the Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, that's crazy. PIF is everywhere. I mean,
yeah, it's wild.
There's a reason that North Korea cannot trade on our exchanges, is because the powers that be decide who can invest and who can't. That's above all of our pay grade. And PIF is invested in, Uber and Boeing and Tesla and Live Nation and, so many companies. And I knew this because I read the Wall Street Journal and I pay attention to the capital markets. Mm-hmm. And so when I saw protesters out there, and when you think about the lack of protesters, I said, something's wrong here. These people just don't show up for some golfers. It was uncharacteristic. That's where my instincts in politics came. And, one of our locals, our U.S. senators, one of them, he was involved. I'm like, oh my goodness, great. I smelled a rat right away, and that got me interested in the topic. So I started paying a lot more attention to what was going on. Mm-hmm. I decided to maybe start writing some stuff on Twitter. And I think one of the first ones I got a couple 100,000 views was I was playing golf in Palm Springs at the Vintage Club, and I got picked up afterwards. I got picked up in my Uber, and the guy's like, "How'd you play?" And I'm like, I played okay. The fairways were wide. That was good. We were talking about this and that, and I'm kind of looking at him. I said, you look like a golfer. And it turns out now he's come out, and I didn't mention his name when I first posted about it, because of his privacy, but it was Barry Henson, and Barry. And I said, "Are you a golfer?" I said, "Are you a pro golfer?" Because hit me, and I'd seen him before. And he said, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh." I said, "What do you drive an Uber for?" He goes, "Oh, I like it, but it's good to make extra money. I'm off season." And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, after that happened, that we have so many golfers in that in the business that are pro golfers, and I'm thinking they barely make it. They're out on these tours and they can barely survive. They're sort of left to their own devices. They don't have teams, and it made me think about teams more. Like if you're a low end on the NFL or some other team, you're going to get paid something. They have stuff to support you. You have practice facilities and physical therapists and all the things. And golfers don't have that. They have to. So by the time they run essentially a small business, and they spend pretty much everything they make plus some to barely survive. So I wrote about that, and that got some hits, and then I started watching it closely. And when it came time, what happened was I just saw the cynicism, of and the shocking lack of critical thought by the golf journalists, and a lack of reporting about where and what PIF really is and where they're invested, and no real objective view of it. And it sort of pissed me off over because
same.
That's an interesting phrase. You actually said objective reporting, and listeners to our show will know I've used the phrase multiple times. There's no such thing as reporters anymore. There's just supporters. They pick a team, they pick a side, and they just put out a narrative they like. That's unfair, I suppose. There are some people that are reporters, but by and large, as we've seen with a lot of the golf media, that they want, or with PGA Tour, that's going to be it. Like some of those other podcasts out there, we don't need to name them. But they were
we can name them. Let's name names. Because look, we know. Look, this ties directly into. I have a particular name for this guys. Media, obviously. Yeah.
You've got the foreplay guys. You've got no laying up guys, and they weren't being fair, Bob, as you say. They were acting as if the PIF and Saudi money had never come across the Atlantic Ocean, and that this was the first time that anybody had heard of Saudi Arabian money. When what makes me laugh is the PGA Tour shop, the fanatics. Who actually run the PGA Tour shop is Saudi owned. The PGA Tour shop. It's the ridiculous double standards of going after the money was just drove me mad. And actually, I think for people like yourself, Bob, and for Jay, and for me, it actually made me go from just liking LIV to feeling like I had to defend it at times.
Exactly, because it was. I mean, even yesterday, I'll give you an example. Dan Rappaport, the journalist, golf journalist, he talked, and it's just the lack of critical editorial. He talked about how he sent some tweet out about the value, like, hey, Tiger's League has, owners and those things. They were paying, I read some reports, I don't know if it's true, but they were paying small amounts for those teams, or, yes. I doubt they've even written a check, frankly, at this point, but they're getting these celebrity owners. And the reality, but LIV hasn't got anything they talk about. It's like, Dan, if you're intelligent at all about business, that that's the last thing that any of the LIV teams would want to do, because they're going to hang on until the league develops, grows. When they finally get their big TV contracts, the value, why would you want to sell a team now at no value? The best thing to do is hold it until that value grows. And there's literally no one calling that kind of stuff out.
But it's so deliberate, Bob, as you say. It was so deliberate. It was, well, no, they can't sell a LIV team. They can't sell a LIV team. Well, why would you want to sell a LIV team? Because you're not going to get any money for it. Get a league, get the growth, get the players, get to year 3, see what's happening, and then sell it. It was, and this perversion that Serena Williams has somehow. Oh, I love Serena Williams. She's one of my sporting icons. But she's somehow an investor in LAGC. No, they're not. They've, as you say, it's very unlikely any money's been written, any checks. It was notional names and notional owners behind things. We know that. But this is what annoys people. Yeah. This complete lack of transparency.
Yeah.
Nothing annoys me more than this. Yeah. So go ahead.
I just think if you go back and objectively look at the history, even, before I wrote my tweet, what happened it was that I'm watching all of this unfold, and the tour, very quickly and haphazardly coming up with elevated events. They're literally taking ideas that had been brought to them by Phil and other people for those elevated events, and getting the college players to, they have a pathway now into the PGA. All of that was only a response to LIV. And the lack of objective reporting about that, and that was going on. And finally, boom, the big news that the merger quote was happening. And what really struck me was I decided, I was hearing about the framework and agreement, the PGA Tour was going to be in complete control, so on and so forth. And so I said, I want to read this thing. So I figured out how to get it, and I saw a copy and I read it, and I was utterly dumbfounded that it had not been reported on correctly. It's like they took the talking points. I think it was a laziness of the golf reporters, just taking preordained talking points by the tour or whoever put them out and just running with those.
Yes.
But if you actually read it and understood the terms and what was being said, that I said, everybody's missing the biggest, couple things about this. One is, no, if you read it carefully, it says they're going to evaluate LIV, but then they're required to figure out how to make teams work in golf. That was the spirit of that agreement. And more importantly, it talked about, and it was really poorly written, frankly, in ways. And I read it over and over. You could read it a couple different ways, but I ended up, I thought about it for probably 5-6 days before I posted it, and read it again and said, am I reading this right? Let me just sit back and do it. And I read it, and I'm like, wait a minute. This thing is not what the tour, yes, it's really clear that they want the tour to be the operations and run the tournaments and, the logistics of putting those things together. But, that PIF would have veto consent rights. And, you could read that veto consent right just to be for new investments. But I said, no, I don't think that's the way that sentence is structured. I read it carefully, went back to it. And by the way, when the Senate hearings, happened and they released all the drafts, I was absolutely right. It was a separate item, and PIF added it literally at the last minute. It went on top of, it wasn't part of that part. And so, they very specifically put in there that we're going to have veto consent rights, which means when you go out, if let's say you're going to start a company and you don't have all the money to start that company, or me, let's say I'm going to do a big real estate development and I want to get what's called an institutional investor. I'll put up some of the money. They put up some of the money, and they want me to run it. They want me to do what I do best, but they also make sure that they have what are called major decision rights or veto consent rights. And so they put restrictions on what I can do. Like, they want me to execute, but I can't sell it without their permission. I can't go out and put debt against it without their permission. I can't go get additional equity without their permission. So when you combine those major decision making rights with the fact that Yasser was going to be chair of the policy committee or whatever it was, it just was very clear to me that essentially he's going to have significant amounts of control. Maybe not all of it, which is fine, right. But I think he would generally control it. And so I literally, you guys, it was interesting. I waited for someone to report that because I thought, am I wrong about this? And then I'm like, no, I think I'm right. And I'm like, I'm going to write this thing. And that's actually how that came about. I wrote it. I'm like, because no one was reporting it. The people, like I remember in the tweet, I think it was Rich Eisen had on Kevin from No Lane Up as his contract expert. I was like, and I'm listening to him talk about it. It's like, this guy doesn't even, like, it was so, so that's how I got there. It was.
I completely, like that's something just to sort of follow up on the media part. Like, it's been so clear that the media has been out over their skis and during this entire process. And it's like, it's been a giant miscalculation by the PGA Tour and its media partners who've, I mean, look, some of those documents, it was very, very clear that Jay Monahan basically said, he's talked to his media partners and they're willing to do, quote unquote, whatever it takes to see the PGA Tour through this battle. And obviously part of that has been sicking their sort of media dogs on LIV and sort of Saudi Arabia and the PIF throughout this whole process. And like anybody that was like savvy enough to like understand, politics and sort of geopolitical stuff and just like know exactly how this like propaganda goes. Like I've been studying it for a while, which is part of the reason why I felt like I was able to tap into this very, very early on because it was so like I felt like I was a quarterback and I was seeing the field so clearly and like no one else in the media, in the golf media specifically, was like really able to sort of see what was actually going on. And maybe they were seeing it, but it's like they refused to report on it, which was at the essence of the corrupt golf media that myself and LIV Golf Nation, shout out to him again, we sort of came up with that phrase because it was very, very clear to us that like either the media wasn't smart enough to sort of pick up on this stuff, or they knew about it and they refused to report on it. Either way, it's like they're not really qualified to talk about it. So I'm glad that like people like you and people like me and others sort of around this sort of LIV universe that have sort of come out of the ether. And it's been clear we've been able to sort of find a voice in this stuff, which I think is really, really good. And I think it's something that was 100% needed. And it was a total miscalculation by the PGA Tour, which, let's be honest, the PGA Tour, they've had a track record of miscalculations the last few years. That's been pretty clear.
Yeah.
Bob, just very quickly, your understanding and your annoyance came through it, but what was your thoughts? I know you said on the media weren't maybe covering it, or so-called experts who. I did hear an expert talking about contract law, and they knew nothing about contract law. And they obviously had no idea how institutional money gets invested. They couldn't tell you the difference in a VC and private equity, and they are different. There are so many things. I was just like, well, this is poor to listen to. In my background, both Jay and I got experience in those areas, and that's why I enjoy the business side of golf.
Yeah.
There's a plug. Make sure people you listen out for our 5 new business interviews we'll be doing over the next month. It's going to be called Doing Business the Fair Way. So there we go. And I'm interviewing 5 different business owners, Bob. We've got a betting app. We've got a guy who invented a caddy to go on the back of pushchairs, different things. Anyway, but when you were reading some of these comments, there were people that didn't understand, and there were people who were deliberately misconstruing the information. What were you making of that? Because that idiocy and naivety are different to deliberately coming down the wrong side of something for to be seen as favorited by a certain by the PGA Tour. That's how it felt. It felt like they were deliberately misrepresenting it.
I just, it was shocked. It was kind of like, Jay just said best. It's like you're sitting there looking at it, and it's a very clear picture of what's going on. And some of the media folks, two kind of comments, or comments that have been directed, one towards a bigger issue than towards me, when I've come out and said stuff. One, about golf. It's just clear that, a lot of the reporters that have got into golf, I think one of them was, Matt Fitzpatrick. He stalked him at college and got to be his friend. I can't remember which one that was. It was
Dan Rappaport. That's Dan Rappaport. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like no other, real basis of being, having the skill set to be a good investigative or even a good reporter or whatever. And so, it's really weird, really, to stalk a golfer in the, the eating place at a college. And
I can't even believe he admitted to that.
I just think it's creepy, but that being said, that the skill level of folks like that. And what was interesting is when I made my comment, they're like, "Well, who are you? You've never. This is like only the 10th time you've made a comment on Twitter." And which you've had no background in golf journalism, so how could you even be any kind of someone that we can trust on this issue? And I'm like, oh my goodness, folks! Like you don't even know how off base you are, and how off base they are, and making those comments. It was actually pretty stunning to me, honestly, that it was that bad. But so I saw, those comments coming in from the reporters. I saw a lack of work, a lack of, I could see that they weren't really trying to understand the real issues, so, there was no real work done. The reality is that the PGA Tour executives, and I think it's really important, by the way, to discern between the leadership at the PGA Tour and the hardworking people that put the tournaments on and do all the work that they do. Yeah. I've learned that, over this time, because obviously once you have a tweet go out like I did, and you guys have probably seen the same, you start getting people message you and, you start developing some sources, if you will. And, but I looked at them, and they had no desire to actually learn about, these types of contracts and go seek a real expert out, which shows their, I guess, lack of real experience, life experience, and enough experience to actually do a good job in reporting on it. So, from that view, I saw that. Then I just saw, I've noticed one, and the funny part is, I just don't even care at all. It's laughable. I actually laugh every time I post something and it goes out. You see these folks come out and they're just in attack mode. They don't understand that, I literally love the PGA more than I like LIV Golf. I've been a huge PGA Tour fan forever. I don't feel the same way about their leadership. But I do feel that the PGA Tour's needed change, and, and I like LIV, and I think LIV's great. It's kind of change. And they're just coming in, and you're instantly a bad person and a LIV shill, all this stuff. And I'm like, it was really interesting to me, to, have those arrows thrown. And
I've said it before. If I'd earned any of the money or all the money that people have accused me of being paid by LIV, I could fund the PGA Tour myself.
It's like, how much are you being paid? There's also been some kind of weird, folks. I know, I know, Jay, you've seen this, one guy, I'll just say his initials were BH, an old golfer.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will state things, and it just doesn't matter what you say. They're not intellectually, I don't, honestly, I don't think they're intellectually competent to have a discussion, honestly.
And this is where,
And there's been, I think, 2 people that I ended up sort of blocking, which I never thought I'd do. And that guy was 2? One of them.
My list is a lot longer than 2, Bob.
Mine too.
Other thing that was interesting, when I started coming out and being critical of the PGA Tour, And on one particular post by Brandel Chambly, I actually just said something innocuous like, that's not right, yada, yada, yada. And the guy blocked me. And I'm like, I was shocked. I didn't say anything mean or nasty or whatever. I just disagreed with the dude.
Yeah. That's who he is.
And then I there was some real nastiness. He and Eamon Lynch have been nasty to the players, the LIV players and different people. It's just really uncalled for. And I can't even believe they get away. And so, I guess in all fairness, I've been nasty back. Like when, I feel like somebody needs to defend, like no other person's doing it. And I made it really clear, like I decided, look, I have a business and, I do great at what I do. And, I'm not going to leave my primary employment, but I decided to take this part-time thing that I'm doing as, quote, a golf journalist and be real about it and do a good job. So if I do put something out, I try to do a good job. I'm not the best writer in the world, so I have to go over it a bunch of times and I've, made weird little mistakes or whatever. But, I try to do that type of work, put into it because that's how I do my business and everything else. And, I can see that, in the golf world, the journalists that are out there, there's a couple that I think have been fairly okay. They've been more neutral, but they're not, as vitriolic as some of the other ones, are not as bad. They're just sort of calling, strikes and balls.
We've got to grade on a curve with these guys for sure. No one, if we're grading objectively, no one has been an A. Probably nobody's been a B or a B plus. We're starting at like B minus and going backwards.
Yeah.
That's like
I don't have the time. I don't have the time. But what golf journalist has actually gone out and looked at sports investing? What happened with cricket in India?
Look, this is the thing, Bob. And I had a long conversation with one sports journalist who, I will be fair to the sports journalist, I'm not going to say their name because the first bit's embarrassing because they didn't know and they call themselves a sports journalist, but they made a comment about how Saudi Arabia will get bored and about the money. And I turned around and said, you're a sports journalist, do some sports journaling. Go and have a look at how much money they've spent on the Saudi Football League and the billions. Like they've got LIV is literally their total spend on LIV for 18 months, sort of nearly 2 years, is something like a seventh of what they spent on on the Saudi Football League in 1 year.
No.
Yeah, it's shocking. And I just I knew right away when I saw LIV, I kind of got it because like as soon as I saw their podium and the champagne, I'm like Formula One, and I know that Aramco is a massive Formula One sponsor. Like my son does kart racing at K1 Sports. Nice. And, we watch Formula One, which I really wasn't into before, but now I've gotten to know Formula One players. That's a great example, honestly, that people don't get. Again, investigative journalism, that they don't get that if LIV starts developing tour stops like, in Australia and Singapore, where they really develop those solid fans out there like that, that the value of that is so significant. And I saw that it had that Formula One vibe, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. They're doing it. I thought it was exciting. And I think what also struck me was the lack of, I've got something I'm coming out with, that'll come out like right after Thanksgiving. That I got some commentary on some of the PGA Tour leadership, but, in general, the lack of vision and the lack of being a good CEO. A good CEO knows the threats, knows when you got to kind of like grab a hold and say, you know what, this one I'm going to have to bring in and, partner with or whatever. That the lack of that clear vision of external and even internal threats, frankly, is stunning to me. Because for me, it's a natural. I could just immediately, when I saw that first podium and I thought about F1, I thought, God, you know what? And, I don't want to get ahead of your questions, but where I see golf going, to me, the PGA Tour really should have they couldn't afford the elevated events that they did, because they haphazardly put them together. Now they're trying to get more from their sponsors. That's just, it's ridiculous. And so really what they should have done is, and where I think that this is going to go, because this is what makes business sense to me. And this is, when you think about how this can all work easily, and whether they do this easily or it ends up turning into this the hard way, I think it's going to end up where I'm going to talk about right now, which is we'll have the PGA Tour and other tours like the European, the DP World and, the Asian tours and all that. We'll have the PGA Tour, and the elevated event will really be the LIV event, where they'll have the teams and the top players get to play at those elevated events, and they'll be in the teams. They'll want to play their way on to LIV, and they may call it something different, but it'll be the quote teams. And then you would have those be the elevated events, and then you would also have the majors. And on top of that, and I've thought about it in different ways, and I thought, well, you could have 15, 20 regular tour events, but you're going to have maybe 14 elevated events total. Maybe 15, 20.
But Bob, why would they want that? Why would LIV? I'm just going to say this now. Why would LIV and PIF want that? If what's going on is going on and people can't play nice, with PIF having endless money, why don't PIF just do that with the Asian Tour? Because the only reason to be involved with the PGA Tour, the only reason was OWGR points. And they've now disappeared. And they've slipped so far down the rankings, the players, they're not going to get them. Just go and create that tour yourself with the Asian Tour, the International Series. They don't need the PGA Tour. And I think the PGA Tour now know that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a great point. I think, sort of my last 3-part series, sort of the last one, I made a point of like, look, Greg Norman has built a team, and Yasser have built, what people, I saw this performance coach one time. He coaches the CEO of Starbucks, and he talked about how when you have to go through hard things, you become better and you become stronger. And the reality is that everyone in that entire LIV organization has had to go through a lot of heartache. I mean, they have put together what they have in the face of a media ban, a ban on vendors. They have still managed to figure out how to pull this together and have developed a team that Ben, I think you're right. They don't need to. They're if they're smart and they go out and they develop an international series, and it's not going to be easy. And I think what'll happen is they could do that. And the sad part is some of the majors that are now majors, they're gonna those will end up losing luster over time, because as the sport becomes more international, new types of majors will evolve, I think, over time.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think the reason they don't have to, but I think it would be great. Just because I've always also been a fan of the PGA Tour, honestly.
Yes.
It has traditions I don't want to see go away.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to kind of tap into. Like, I do think there are kind of two routes to take. One is kind of that nuclear option where the PIF says, all right, this isn't going to work. We're gonna double down, triple down, and basically say, all right, we've got LIV, we've got the Asian Tour. We're basically going to turn the Asian Tour and LIV into the tour, the global tour of the world, where Asian Tour is already getting OWGR points. You bolt on LIV on top of that. You sort of create this series of elevated Asian Tour events, basically, where maybe you expand it a little bit, and you put it to, what is the OWGR says, the average has to be 72. Make it 72. And basically break open the piggy bank, give the offers to all of the stars that you've already talked to that already have shown interest in LIV. You bring them over. All of a sudden, the PGA Tour is in a horrible, horrible spot. I don't want to see that nuclear option happen. Like, I do think that there is value to the PGA Tour and its legacy and like all of those like entry points to the sponsors that like I know for a fact that Yasser and the PIF, they want to be involved in that. Like they want to be involved in the golf establishment. They want to have a seat at the table 100%. Because it does sort of serve their interests a lot too. I think that it's really, really important, to them to be part of this ecosystem. And I do think that that's like kind of the angle, which is part of the reason why I feel so confident that it still is going to go this route that we think, because number one, it's going to be the best thing for the game, having everything under one umbrella. Two, you get to sort of work in lockstep. These tours to sort of figure out what's going to be the most efficient thing to make global golf as big as it can be, as better as it's ever been. Like that's what I've been rooting for this whole time. I still think that that's probably what we're going to get, and sort of get this sort of global series that you were sort of talking about. I still think that's probably the.
I also think it solves a problem. One of the issues that created this was you have, the top tier players, and why I think it's good to continue with the merger. You have the top tier players who were sort of, really the ones driving the revenue stream and the TV and all that kind of stuff. And, they felt like that they should get more, and this is not a new thing in sports. They felt they should get more of the pie. And so I think that a merger, when it does go through, it solves that problem in a longer term way, because you can have, just the regular tour events, and then the players will play their hearts out to get onto, what is LIV and the team golfs, which is the real superstar thing where they go around. And if they don't, let's say they don't play well and they get, relegated down, or off of that. What really struck me and what this all comes to is like, why don't they, to me, it's so easy and clear to see the vision of why make it so hard. They should be cooperating, and because it's going to make those, the PGA Tour hasn't wanted to do the fall events forever, right? So it was really easy to see they could have had a normal tour schedule, had the quote elevated events or LIV, team thing, go around, go international. Yep. And it really gives it a nice way for players to be able to go up and down from LIV, if you will, onto the different tours, and they're cooperate on schedules and the majors. And so just the resistance to it.
That was Jay just being negligent. He's a CEO, as a jobless CEO. I've said it so many times, the jobless CEO, and it's very basic 101 business, and makes you worry why he hasn't done it, is you've got to examine your strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And he didn't do that. He said, boasted, I'm not going to answer the phone. Don't be so stupid. Of course you answer the phone.
Because that's unfortunately, the PGA Tour. This has become very, very abundantly clear to me, just like having studied leadership in the past 20 years, ever since I've been in college. So, like, this is part of their culture. Like Jay Monahan, the culture that he inherited and continue to build is not one of collaboration. It just isn't. No. Their culture is, and I was just reading this thing about their how the strategic partnership or strategic alliance, whatever you want to call it, with the European tour started. Like, it wasn't really a collaboration. It was basically Jay Monahan threatening, like, oh, we are taking your sponsors and all this stuff unless you do what I say. Which is like, yes, it's a total takeover. That has been their MO from the beginning. It's like, look, that may work in certain scenarios, but when you're dealing with a behemoth like the PIF, like, you can't do that. Like, it just doesn't work. Yeah. So that's kind of where. Yeah.
Yeah. They have just, I also think it's about power and control, for the tour leadership. This is their world. This is their, they view it as their kingdom. And, it's like, look, if you're Jay Monahan and his crew, they get paid millions of dollars. I mean, I remember when I looked at the tax return like 8 of the executives get paid more than the total purse for the Latin American tour for a season. I mean, and Monahan's flying around on the tour jet, and he does it for his personal time, for personal safety, yet nobody knows who the hell he is. It's so dumb and it's so obvious. And, he's building these headquarter buildings. It's his power thing. And, I think at the heart of it, I've got a post coming up. I think at the heart of it, Monahan's what I would call a number 2 guy.
Yes.
He's not at heart a number 1, a real high quality CEO. He got
number 2 guy. He ain't that good.
Yeah, right. He was under these folks that helped him, Wah and Tim Fincham, and that kind of brought him up. And he doesn't have the tools intrinsically. I mean, look, a number 2 guy or a number 1 guy doesn't go off on a panic attack. Vacation when he screws up so badly. I mean, a leader, like, look, if you make the mistake, you make the mistake. But that to me shows that, look, you either have it or you don't. And, to me, it's obvious with the number of mistakes that he made when he had these forces building all around him, PGL, Mickelson coming for the elevated events, all these things, and he wasn't able to effectively deal with it.
Yep.
And the way he dealt with it, honestly, that's another thing that just really angered me, was dragging the families and the victims of 9/11 into golf. Was
the lowest of the low. That was the lowest of the low. To then turn his back on him as well, it was awful.
Just the most disgusting. He's got to be like, if you took CEOs in the history of, and somebody doing something so disgustingly blatant and so public, and then literally turning his back on his own players, doing the 180, the people that he had dragged into it and used to develop this narrative, and frankly, to hire the public, when it came out, my political instincts when I went out to Pumpkin Ridge, and then hearing later, they hired Coit, they hired a really good political firm to make all that happen and pay those people to be out there even. When I read that in the Wall Street Journal, I'm like, oh my, it was ridiculous. And I just think that, it's been an epic failure on Monahan's part. And, so, well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, Monahan has to go. I think that's like the one thing that like basically the entire golf world can agree on, is that Jay Monahan can't last past this deadline of December 31st. It doesn't sound like he will, but at the same time, it's like, who knows at this point? Like, who knows how much longer he's going to hang around? Like, I don't know. I think he is probably going to be out sometime early 2024, but, we'll have to see.
If you think about it, like right now, I mean, it sort of makes sense, because like, who else is going to go in and do what's going to be, has to be done right now, just for continuity? Jimmy Dunn, he's the only one. And look, my guess is, I would say it's a fairly educated guess. My guess is that Jimmy Dunn came into this, because, some folks realized that, they had made a mistake. And, I'd put a little money on this. I wouldn't bet everything, but, I believe that, he was brought in to maybe try to help fix some of this, on the tour level. And he's the only guy right now, but I'm sure he's pissed at whoever he did a favor for to come in and have to go in front of the Senate. That probably wasn't real plausible.
I don't think that was I don't think that was on his bingo card when he took that job. And, for sure.
He looked so darn uncomfortable up there. I was like, oh God. And, he's a really competent guy. And, and
he loves golf. He does.
Yeah,
he really does. Legitimately.
He could be a guy right now that if Monahan left, that would kind of take this over, but he doesn't want to do that. I can't see him wanting to do that. He's good at what he does. And, I just don't see that. So I think that, that's one of, practically speaking right now to get through this negotiation, who else is going to do it? Mine.
Can I ask you both a question? You say, I want to ask you both a question. I want to get a quick feel of the room. And but you both say, oh, well, who else to get us through it? Who else is? Now, we've all agreed. I love the PGA Tour, love the players, love the concept, love the legacy. I'd love to see the PGA Tour and LIV work together. I don't like the leadership. We've been very blunt. We've all said the same thing. Now, where I was a little bit let down by some of the players, and I've said this publicly, I said it on Twitter, I've said it on the podcast before, and I'll say it again. All of the players should have downed tools on June the 7th at the RBC and said, we ain't playing unless you go. Because they'd all been lied to. He lied to every single one of them. He lied about what they were thinking, what they're doing, and how they were doing it. He then turns round, goes on TV, I use the money, and begs for money, having said he'd never want it. He betrays the 9/11 families. And then we have people like Jason Hadley or whatever his name is saying he's been let down. Mate, you're 198th in the world. Just calm down.
Yeah.
But he had a point. And while he would not have been getting compensation, there are others being let down. I genuinely do not understand why those players just didn't stand up and go, we are not going to tee up a ball at all until you go. You are the problem. You've caused this.
I have a really strong view. I have a really strong view on that. The PGA Tour, by design, the executive team's design, they have kept in power because they have essentially kept the players separated. The players have not been they're not united in any way. Yes, they have player representatives on the board, but they haven't had this kind of an issue. So look, the way they have kept their power over PGA Tour players has been by keeping them separate, sort of being autocratic at times. And a lot of the players fear that. When I read the tax returns and you look at the board members, I went back a number of years and you could see the different player members on their actual, where their address is for their individual investments and where they get paid. Interestingly, a lot of them have their actual LLCs and stuff at tour headquarters, their actual private. So the tour somehow is helping them manage the business side of what they do. Now, I saw Scotty Scheffler. No, his is in Texas. I saw some other players. They're like, Tiger wasn't there. He was, there are players that are, that are obviously like, nope, I have my business things going to be here. I'm not going to have the tour manage that as well.
Yep.
And so I think you have a case where, they have essentially managed, got their fingers so far into these players and kept them apart. And that is why they haven't done that. I mean, they just haven't been organized. They've been afraid to speak up.
Yes, 100%. And that sort of ties into sort of where I think golf has needed to go for a while. And it also ties into kind of the person that I think that needs to lead this going forward. So, and that'll sort of lead into my last question to you, Bob. So, as far as the players go, the way things stand now, it has been abundantly clear to me that now that the PGA Tour is moving to a more for-profit model, they need to have a players union. There's almost no way around it. There needs to be be somebody that's run specifically by the players that is always looking out for the players' interests. That's pretty clear to me. That's where this needs to go. The players need to have, 50% roughly equity in this for-profit thing, because that's exactly how some of the other, not exactly, but this is, pretty much how all the other leagues are run. The NFL, the NBA, the players roughly are 50%, of all revenue. That's where this needs to go. So we'll have to see if that actually happens. I did want to squeeze in a little plug for who I think needs to be commissioner, just because he is he's a very, very unique candidate, and he happens to be a fellow Duke alum. So I got to give him a shout out. Joe Ogilvy has been very sort of active on social media. He's been active with the players. He has 10 years of experience in private equity. Like, he gets this stuff. He also has 15 years on the PGA Tour. Like, he gets all of this stuff, like, more than any other player gets it. So it's like he is very uniquely positioned to sort of come in as the new commissioner, where he uniquely understands the private equity funding world that is what the PGA Tour is currently moving towards. He also understands the legacy of the PGA Tour and its players and the tournaments and all that other stuff. He is basically the only person that I can think of that could lead the PGA Tour into this for-profit world that can balance the priorities of the players, the priorities of the investors, the priorities of the leadership of the tour, and be the one to sort of lead it into the future. We'll have to see. But so that
I have a different, I mean, I think that there's two levels. I think there's two levels. Yeah. There's going to be, well, yes, maybe as the commissioner of the PGA Tour, but that's going to be different than the CEO and who really in my view, who leads the commercial interests. And, you know, I think that the tour is really going to want to find someone that understands media growing, you know, that really knows how to be the CEO of a large organization, you know, to manage, quote, the commercial interest. Now, the individual commissioner of the PGA Tour, the commissioner of LIV, and the commissioner of the Asian or DP Tours, you know, how that's all going to remain. I imagine. Yeah, I think if they were smart about it, they would in some ways keep those separate to manage those things, you know, in some ways. I don't know exactly how that, you know, kind of comes out. But I also think going back to the future and the player representation, I think it's important that they solve, there should be a two thoughts of that. And what they need to do is figure out how to balance the interests of the majority of the tour members and then the top players. And that really what caused this. So when, you know, like when you have you know, maybe a players union, you're also going to have, you know, the top players figure out how they're represented.
Yes.
As well in their interests, and figure out how you get them to, you know, sort of almost like both those groups have to agree, you know, as they move forward policy. Cause that's what caused this whole, disruption. So I think that that's going to have to be field out, because the interest of the top 30 players are going to be different than the journeyman, on the tour. And I
completely agree. Part of the problem, Bob, like you actually you use the word CEO of the new co and you use the word commissioner. Is the problem here that you say he's maybe a good 2, he might be a good 3, whatever. But let's take Jay out of the situation. Again, not you, Jay. Jay Monahan.
Right.
Let's take Jay Monahan out of the situation. If you're the chairman, CEO, whatever we want to call it, of a top level company, let's use the PGA Tour is the example, I suppose. But you've got a guy who's the chair of the CEO of the new co. You don't really want him to be the commissioner of the tour anyway. It's a different skill set. It's a different person. It's a different. I use a weird analogy. You got big firms like General Electric. The CEO of General Electric doesn't know how drills are made in some random part of Germany, or how a conductor's made in a factory in Mexico. They don't need to know. They have someone that runs the Mexico factory, someone that runs the Bavarian drill making factory. But you know what I mean? You don't want that. You don't want a person who's running Newco to also be the commissioner.
That's what I think. I think whoever takes on that overarching role should be passionate about the success of LIV in teams. They should be passionate about the success of the PGA Tour, and they should be passionate about the success of the other tours like the Asian and DP World Tour. And that person should be guided by, how do we continue to grow this game? How do we continue to bring more revenue to our players and for all the players in these different tours, and to make it successful throughout the world? And you're right. I think just as the day-to-day commissioner of the PGA Tour, I see that, that being a different job, really.
Yes.
Because, that person's dealing with people misbehave and, problems and, that kind of stuff. So that's the way I see it, but who knows what they'll do. Yeah.
And I thought you both made some really good points about the sort of, because there really is a tour within a tour. There really is a sort of top level player on the PGA Tour, and then there's sort of the rank and file. When I'm talking about a new commissioner sort of lead players, I am really talking about more the rank and file that like has to, like, they have a value that is totally different than the top players that sort of have their own value. So, I mean, you could easily say that the top, 20 to 30 players have as much value as like basically the rest of the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, like the rest of the golf. Like there really is there are these sort of two universes. That sort of leads to my article that I wrote about the sort of future of sort of teams and expanding on everything. Some really, really big picture ideas that we're not really going to get into now. I'm going to save that for another podcast, but I totally recognize. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Oh, I thought about, when they talk about LIV teams, only a certain number, I say, really look at the NFL and baseball. You have basically the American League and the National League. I mean, we may see, teams from, European teams that are big over there and American teams. And then you end up having, and I frankly think the playoffs that LIV have done are much more compelling than the FedEx Cup, which I've always felt weird to me. I like the idea of these teams, competing against each other in match plays and that to me would be a really compelling championship, if you will, and how golf could get really interesting.
FedEx has always felt forced, isn't it? That's the problem with the weird scoring, and on paper it could be good, but I think that my concern, if you want the PGA Tour and you want LIV to work together and you want that to be the thing, I think you've got under 9 weeks for it to happen. Because I actually think that if you go much past 9 weeks, then LIV will start on their season and there's no going back. And let me explain briefly why. Lots of names rumoured to be going across, this, that, and the other. Everyone talks about different names, but the majors are on the cusp of looking ridiculous by not having LIV players in them. You can argue, oh, well, someone can go and qualify. Oh, Lee Westwood's not playing as well as he was 2 years ago. Okay, I can understand that, yes, Taylor Gooch could go and qualify, and he didn't. I understand that. Do I think Taylor Gooch should be in there because he's good enough? Of course I do. Is Taylor Gooch a top 30 player in the world? Of course he is. Is he top 60 player, 50 player? Obviously. But, okay, if you want to have your argument that Taylor Gooch could have qualified, I hear it. I don't agree, but I'll hear it. Well, Lee Westwood isn't playing as good as he was 2 years ago and would probably have dropped out the top 50, 60, 70 in the world based on his last 2 years of golf. Do I think he's a top 100 player? Again, of course I do. Should he be at the PGA Championship being top 100? Of course he should be. But if 3 or 4 players leave the PGA Tour in the next 6 weeks, and just throw names out there that people talk about, you hear the Victors, you hear the Rams, you hear the Finaus, you hear all these different names, right? Let's just pick any random 4 players, Finau, Rahm, Cantlay and Schauffele, because they've been in the news about not playing the TGR, not playing in Bermuda. Again, not saying those, I'm just saying those 4 names. If those 4 players don't have direct access to majors because of OWGR, we've jumped the shark. We've gone full happy days. Fonzie's jumped the shark. It's happened.
Yeah.
And if that happens, that's it. There is no going back then, because the majors will have to give access to LIV players. They'll have to come up with some rule, because they can't have a major without those. Might not be those 4, but 4 players, 4 top players. They can't have it, and it will look ridiculous. And once that happens, the PGA Tour have got no bargaining chips left.
Right. If they don't give them access, they're going to lose their stature as a major. I mean, that's what's going to happen. The PGA of America and the USGA are going to be put in a situation. And by the way, those are big money trains for them. When when the USGA owns the US Open or the PGA of America has their half of the Ryder Cup, I think I got that right. My view is exactly what you said. If LIV grabs 3 new players a year for the next 2 years and pretty marquee players, you have just changed the game. And what's been happening this is another going back to the media. And their view has been, the talking points of the tour. Well, they knew the rules, so they're not getting points. That's just BS. It's a corrupt point system. And it is governed by the very people that have been trying to push LIV out of the competitive landscape of golf. And it's just not even accurate in any way. And it's almost shocking, again, going back to the media, to see that there's no critical thinking behind that. They're just pushing a PGA talking point. It's, well, they knew the rules. And because watch, if it's in their best interest or they're going to get money from it, if this deal happens, watch how fast they can get OWGR points. Yes. I mean, they can move really fast when it's in their benefit. It's like
the whole thing is going to flip. Yeah. Once people have a vested interest and they realize that they're losing potentially that vested interest in whatever it is, the golf establishment, the PGA Tour, the top level of golf, everything's going to flip. So now, I just want, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say something about, you mentioned Jon Rahm, and I would say, think about it this way. Now, I don't know if he's going to go to LIV or not, frankly, but what I would think about, if you look at what the TGL League is doing, they're doing it in Florida, where all the guys that live in Florida can easily get to the SoFi thing, and be there and show up. Okay, so if you're a tour player, how many events do they play in a year? How many, like Rahm? Is it 20? How many is he going to play in?
24-ish.
Yeah. Okay. Now, is that with the majors?
Yeah.
Okay. So
with the majors, about 26.
20 to 25, right? With the majors.
We'll say 25. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. So if you're 25 events, and you've made a commitment to your home tour back in Europe that you wanted to remain a member of. Now you've got to put how many events in over in Europe. And don't forget, these PGA Tour players, they all have all this corporate stuff all over them. They have to play in a bunch of corporate things. And everybody forgets about, on their off time, they're out traveling to here and there and everywhere. And you get someone like Jon Rahm, who's in San Diego and Arizona, or Xander Schauffele, who is in San Diego, for a lot of his time. It's once you play in all those events and then you have to travel to Florida, you're not one of the quote Florida crew. It's not easy. So now, could he be, maybe going to LIV or not? Possibly, but I think, just as big of a reason, is just the sheer number of events. And the big one that I think people have forgotten about is his commitment to the European. He wanted to the Spain, and then
he plays 2 events in Spain. He plays 2 events in Spain every year. Plays Rolex Series, and look, we've all heard lots of rumors, and likely Bob and Jay. By the time this comes out, it will be some players will be announced, whoever might be coming. And
right.
I think we did a long piece examining Jon Rahm and examining Finau and examining Siwoo Kim, Sung Jae Im, and a few others about their likelihood to come. Why would they come? And I think you've touched on that. I think you've touched on that again. That it's not about name me a price. Here I come. There's more to it than that. And again, I've got to be careful how you phrase things. I wanted to say a different word, but I go, the morons on Twitter go, oh, it's just blood money. Well, actually, it's not just blood money. There are people like Jon Rahm who've got properties in Spain, and I'm just saying because the people are rumouring him to come out. People like Jon Rahm who've got properties in Spain that want to play in Spain. They want to play around the world. Like Ian Poulter, I spent time with Ian, and he is one of the nicest, most considered thinkers I've met in sport. Really talks about it. And Ian's like, he said, look, I had an opportunity. He said, yeah, money's great. I'm on the back end of my career. He said, but he talked about 2 things, sort of the business side of the Majestics and how all that works and how exciting. And you talked to Ian Poulter about the Majestics and trying to get the business deals across, hosting this, hosting that, meeting this sponsor, doing this 4-ball, doing. He's like a 7-year-old who's got a pair of football boots for the first time. And he is so excited. He's laced on his new football boots, his first ever proper pair with metal studs. He's so excited about it. And he's talked about, he said, for the first time ever in his career, he said, I think he had 8 weeks. In an 8-week period, he had 6 weeks off. And he went and spent time in England with his family. He said it was amazing. So again, you could say Rahm, you could say Finau, you can say whoever you want, but these people don't necessarily want to play 26 or 27 events on tour and the majors, and maybe a couple of others. Maybe they end up somehow qualifying for Rolex. I think that people want to see, can I play 18 to 20 events a year and earn really good money?
Yeah.
And there are players that aren't at that level that can't. So they've got to go play 25, 30 events a year.
Well, their families are important to them. And, when you look at John Rahm, you get any of these folks that have, new spouses, new families. That's a big, a Tony Finau story. I was in the Portland airport is that, Tony was doing well enough not to be doing this. I'm at the Portland airport and Finau, sort of walks up to the bag thing where I'm waiting for my bags. And he's got his wife with him and his kids, and he's got, the child seat things. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, and I'm like, and he walks up next to me. I was like, oh, hey, fan of yours, Tony. I said, wow, you got the whole crew with you. He started laughing. He goes, well, I want to see him. I said, are you going to Nike or something? He was like, yeah, I'm going out to Nike for a thing. But all of a sudden it hit me as like, he has to do that trip by himself, or if he wants to see his family, they're all with him. And he's got if you guys would have seen him, I was like, gosh, guys, dude, you have the money. You could hire someone to at least help you carry something. No, he's there with the family doing his thing. And, so I think that's important to those guys. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And I think he is smart enough that if he is going to ink a live deal, that like a private jet's going to be part of it. So, but hey, that's purely speculation, but if he's able to easily get his family from event to event, I think that's going to be a big bonus. So, and the way that the calendar's being structured, and look, we've heard, and by the time this comes out, it might be out, it might not be. We've heard the reason the calendar's being delayed is there might be one of the events that was going to happen isn't. And I'm not going to betray any trust, and neither's Jay. We've had it on good authority. An event that was going to happen and that we've talked about and we were excited about isn't. And that's why the calendar is up in the air. That might not be the case. We're not going to betray any confidences. That's not what we do. We've never done that. People say, oh, who's your sources? Some people tell us things and we talk to people. We have relationships, and part of those relationships is not being a dick about it. But that's where the calendar. But the calendar is so cleverly done. And if you look at what they did this year and what they're talking about doing for next year, that if you are, again, I'm not saying Finau's come on, just saying if you're Finau and you're trying to do that family blend thing, or if you're Siwoo Kim or Sung Jae Im or whoever it might be, or bloody Scotty Scheffler, whoever it might be, the way they blend and they'll do Valderrama and then a week off, then the British Open, then a week off, and then the British Live event, wherever that might be. They're doing it so that you can go, you do those 5 weeks, you get 2 live events in, you get a major in, you can have your family with you for some of it, not for some of it, and then you get 2 weeks off. They do the calendar really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to consider. So Tony can get on the private jet and say to his wife, look, I'm going to go and do a double header. I'm going to go and do Hong Kong and Singapore. I can't remember the name of the course, sorry, in Singapore.
Sentosa.
Yeah. He's all right. And I go, and his wife say, okay. And off he goes. He does those 2. He's away for 10 days and he comes back. And he's then with the family for 14 days, 15 days before he goes away again. And then they might go on a longer trip. I think people don't understand. It's not just about money. These guys are filthy rich. They have got generational wealth. They're richer than you and I, Bob.
Yeah.
I joke, of course, I'm poor. But the comment is the fact that people don't understand it's not just about, it's about quality of life.
Absolutely.
When you've got money, like they do,
just keeping your body in shape. I'm getting older. I'm really start feeling it now. But just keeping your body in shape and being able to recover and they work really hard, and, playing a golf tournament, out when it's hot out. I mean, it takes a lot out of your body. So their ability to recover. I mean, I've caddied a number of times out on the LPGA tour for some friends. And, when you go, I remember I went to Arkansas one time, the P&G sponsored an LPGA event, where Walmart's headquartered. And I went down with a friend. She asked me if I'd come and caddy with her. And oh my God, when you're there for a week and it's hot like that, and, you're walking the entire time, and, me, I had to, toting around the bag. It is not easy on your body, because, you go right from the Sunday event. We flew into Rogers. I'm out on the greens. I'm figuring the greens out, getting them in my book, and I'm trying to do a good job as a caddy. But the players are doing the same thing. They've got to practice. They've got 2 pro-am events, and they're trying to squeeze it all in and rinse and repeat. That's a pretty tough lifestyle. You figure out quickly. It's not easy. Yep. So I think that break is really important. And again, I go back to, that's why it makes so much sense that becomes sort of the pinnacle that players will want to play into and play up to be able to get to that level where they can be part of a league like that. They'll try their darndest on their whatever tour they're on to get up to that, so they can, that solves a lot of problems. It solves the top 30 problem. It solves, the schedule problem for the better players, and, all that stuff. So that's why I think it goes to where it goes.
Yep. Yeah. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And we'll live in a very different, weird golf world. And Connor, who does the Society of Golf Historians podcast, not sure if you've ever checked that out before, Jay and Bob. Have you ever checked that out?
Yeah, no. But
I love it. He talks about old Tom Morris and about Tommy Jr. He talks about all the golden age of golf. He talks about every element. He does the rise and demise of each of the golf companies like Spalding and Ben Hogan Golf. Fantastic podcast. But I was laughing the other day and thinking, in 2 years' time, he'll be doing a podcast looking back at the start of LIV and how we're where we are now. Because nothing more has happened in golf than has happened, in my opinion. Well, golf, okay, before Peter Stacey, whenever I say golf, always reminds me on Twitter, no, it's pro golf, because there is a lot. So nothing more has happened in pro golf.
Men's golf.
There's a lot of sticklers in this space.
Year and a half.
Yeah, well, I mean, this LIV. It's when Arnold Palmer and Nicklaus peeled off to form the PGA Tour from the PGA of America. It's a similar sort of historical thing. And Tiger coming to golf was historical in of itself, I think. This is a big deal, and I'll be really curious to see where it goes. I'm hopeful that they get this done and do what's best for everybody. I'll just be interested to see all the people that were so against this. You can already see it happening. I'll say, look, if they have teams, they may call them something different or whatever, but it's really going to be the teams. And they're like, oh, but that'll mean LIV's gone. It's not going to be, there's going to be these people out there that they were so taken down the road by, frankly, Monahan and company in one direction that they've just lost all common sense. And it'll be interesting to see what their feelings are when this, new traditions are formed.
And magically, a lot of those counts have completely disappeared. So, and I expect that to sort of happen, continue to happen over the next 6 months. We'll have to see. I mean, look, there's just to sort of, I know we're way over time at this point, but
17 minutes sort of over. Thank you, Bob.
Just to put a bow on it, though, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are talking about the history of golf and all that stuff, which is great. Like it serves a really, really important purpose. To me, the most important part about this whole thing has been talking about the future, the sort of current to sort of future of golf, because that's way, way more interesting than anything that I've learned about the past, because this is it. Like, this is the most interesting time in probably the history of professional golf, because there's so many ways this can potentially go. I think that we're all kind of in agreement in sort of where it's going to wind up. And I think those conversations are the things that are really intriguing to me, which is part of the reason why we started this podcast, was to have these conversations that like other people are frankly not having for a variety of reasons. So Yeah, I'm really excited about the future. Everybody, I probably said that on like every single podcast that we've done, because it's just like, it's so interesting. It's like seeing a reality show that's sort of evolving in front of you. And it's like you have this puzzle where some of it's put together, but a lot of it you have to figure it out. Like, that's where I think the three of us have really tapped into that. And that's really a part of the interest to this whole thing.
I think that for another podcast, what excites me about the future and for another podcast, I mean, I see LIV, I bet if I had a team, they're going to want to have their own home courses, right? Or they're going to develop their own team.
For sure.
They're going to support their teams in ways with performance centers and, all the practice facilities. They may have home courses. And also I think about like, I wished I would have seen more of this from LIV, frankly. I think that they should be going out where they have these kids leagues. I know in San Diego, Chris Smeal has that great kids league that he does, the International League, and he's a great instructor. I think he's had over 150 kids go to college scholarship. Nice. But he's got these big organizations. I think those kids should be wearing 4 aces and high flyers hats. And,
to be fair, Bob, Majestics have been really good at that.
Yeah. And I think
Majestics have been fantastic. Look, I'm not blowing smoke up Ian's ass here. They've been superb with that. And also the range goats. Those are the two, like, everyone's doing different things, but the two that I've seen do the most, especially with the range goats, done a lot with young black golfers. They did a thing with young black golfers in London. I know they did a thing with young black golfers in a couple other places. Harold Varner's very into the sort of getting that inclusivity, and I know he feels very privileged to be able to do that. So, but I completely agree, there could be more. I think, Bob, what I would love to see, and
I had like the A's, the Oakland A's, we had all their like colors and logos and stuff, and I think that's how like it's going to build like. That's, I think, where those teams will really get value and they really hook into that.
Do you know what I think would be a great thing that I think could be done? And it's kind of on the vein of what you had. There's a lot of money floating around. We know that. And you don't have to buy 35 courses and facilities today. But let's pick on the 4 aces, right? Very different areas geographically the 4 aces come from in America, with where Double P is, where DJ is, where P Reed, or where they originated from, right? We know in America, as there are in England, I looked it up earlier today, I found 11 9-hole golf courses for sale. Now, there are definitely going to be more, because there'll be some that just aren't on the website I looked at. Find the 4 aces, I buy one 9-hole golf course and and put a small driving range on it, in where PP's from, where P Reed's from, where Uline is from, where DJ's from. And I get 4 aces, XYZ, in those places. And they don't have to be big, but if you start doing that, and what you wanted there, Bob, with those grassroots comes through, and all of a sudden you have the 4 aces golf tournament. And I like the idea of 9-hole golf. I don't think there's enough of it. Get in, play, hour and a half, done, home, lovely. And I actually think that could be a real thing that if I was involved in one of the teams, I'd be looking into. Can I find some 9-hole golf courses and get them going?
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, it's coming.
All that's great. Yeah, I think there's so much future in that. That's again where the PGA, they have first tee and all that stuff, and that's all good. But there's so much more that can be done. I think around the teams and getting kids competing, at a junior level, early, and having teams. And like, one of the things, I often wondered was if LIV would have just strictly taken the college, the NCAA formats, because what are they? They're 54 holes. Some of them, I think, but their teams or whatever, it would have been much harder for people to criticize the PGA Tour, really criticize, because that's what they, I don't know. So like
they would have found something. Yeah.
No, exactly. So. Yeah, I think all those. I'm really excited about it. I actually, frankly, would love on a local level to have the ability to, almost like you see, like people sponsor little league teams. I'd love to sponsor like a little 4 aces, or I'm a high flyer, fan. So I'd love to sponsor like a little high flyers team. That'd be cool, and get them their bags and their balls and their hats and stuff like that. So I'm waiting for that day to happen. That'd be cool.
I think all that's coming. I think just the discussions that I've had with various folks, like I know Bryson is really big in it. Like this exact idea, like I definitely think it's going to happen in various parts of the world. I know that they're going to tap into the India market too with some of the stuff with Lahiri, and like they have really a global team. Like they probably have the most global team, and that's really kind of their brand. So, and I could definitely see all these other folks doing a lot of the same stuff. So, it's really exciting times. It's really exciting times. I'm really excited about the future of everything and sort of developing these teams in golf, because we haven't had it, and there's been a lot of doubters. And I think, look, we reached a certain capacity in golf where like we need to do something else. We need to tap into a younger demographic, and this is the primary way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be curious. LIV, the framework agreement. They weren't supposed to be really kind of looking at outside capital. The PGA Tour has obviously been unsolicited offers coming in. Probably, and again, I'm just guessing, but, I can't imagine LIV hasn't been quietly talking to some players. I'll be really curious to see, what happens when all this shakes out. That to me, that's like, I've been waiting bated breath to see what's been going on behind the scenes there.
Oh, for sure. And I'm sure a lot of this stuff is going to come out in time. So I know we're kind of coming up on an hour and a half here because this has been such a great conversation, but I do want to get you out of here on this.
A rapid hour and a half as well, mind. It feels like a really quick hour and a half.
Yeah. I know it's totally flown by. As far as the merger goes, I know obviously we've already talked about it. We've already kind of talked about it at length. I want to get your perspective on, just with all the information you've gathered. Obviously, you've done a lot of analysis that we've already talked about on Twitter. What do you think is, like, let's say in a year's time, what's the most likely scenario that we have? Is it that we continue off on these sort of two separate tracks, or the merger goes through and we have this additional private equity money that's more US based, that sort of helps with governmental approval here in the United States? Like, what do you think is the most likely scenario?
I mean, I was, the first thing that was popping in my head is, well, it depends on the DOJ. That's what I was thinking. Because, like everybody forgets, at a higher level, there's this, 800-pound gorilla sitting out there, which is the DOJ. And so I think what would be most likely if there's a merger, would be, we're going to have PIF, that I think that the DOJ is going to want to see some other capital in this, and frankly, I was told that, from some of my sources when, I'd also just like to quickly, I know we're short on time to bring that up. It's like the people say, well, how would you ever talk to some of these people on the inside and the tour, whatever? It's like, look, I'm out there. It's easy to find my company and my website, get a hold of me. It's like, how stupid can you be? Somebody wants to get a hold of you, but, I think that the DOJ, I was told wants to see some additional capital in there. And I think PIF, is probably just sitting back and letting some of that play out. They're smart. And by the way, Yasser has probably had, I don't know how many people game all of this out far ahead of time now. And for those that aren't a student business, like maybe some golf journalists are listening, possibly, when you're in business and, it's game theory, if you go to any good business school, I mean, there are people that all of this has been mapped out of decision-making trees of what happens if this happens or this doesn't happen. And I'm sure PIF has gamed this out, all the way down in the road for all these particular things. And so, so I think that the most likely thing of the tour is that we'll have PIF, maybe some additional outside capital, because the DOJ, if the DOJ wants it. And, I'm hoping, I think the smartest thing to do would be to kind of almost keep them separate for a while. I would personally like to see the LIV name stay on, and and have it. But I do think that that's going to be the outcome, from a business side. And, the TV, the ability to grow. I think everybody's going to see the light on teams if they merge, because if that's where there's so much value to be had there. So I think that they'll want to keep teams because they're going to be able to create so much value and so many more TV revenues from teams. And I think really compelling will be, again, going back to, with the Ryder Cup, when you have individual matches and team matches, that kind of battling with teams against each other is actually really compelling. It's much better to watch on TV, I think. And
100%.
So
we need more of it. We definitely need more of it.
I think it goes there, eventually. So, but that's from the actual business, just the pure business side of it. I think it could very well not happen for a variety of reasons, which would be sad in many ways. But move on, and I think PIF could survive and do a great job, and actually would probably end up dominating. They'll pick some players off, and
I think that's the thing, Bob. As I said, if in 9 weeks there isn't a deal done, I actually think that could be the end. I think we could look back and people will go, oh, what crap is he talking? How will it be the end? It's the PG. But people don't understand how money works. You just listen to these people. If you look at the SPJ article about the PGA Tour going and asking the tour host for more money, it's just people don't understand how money works, and that's what's at play here. Look, Bob, we've taken up an hour and 30 minutes of your time. If anyone is still with us, thank you. I imagine you've either been painting a fence or doing some cleaning or doing some chores, and you've got us in your ears. And thank you so much for having us in your ears. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look, Jay, as always, thank you, buddy. I will no doubt speak to you 55 times in the next 10 days, or 10 minutes, sorry. And Bob, thank you for coming on the show. Would you be happy to come back on, Bob, in January once it's all played out?
Yeah, we have so much we could talk about, right? All these topics we could
100%.
Almost wasn't enough. Well, I mean, I geek out on it, so it's hard for me, but we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
right,
we're definitely going to have you back on.
I've got to press stop. We've all got homes to go to. Some of us, it's late at night in their country. I know it's the morning for you guys. I've got a family to go to. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to our show today. Mark will top and tail it as he always does. Shame not to have Mark with us today, but he couldn't make it. But Bob, thank you. Jay, thank you. My name's Ben. I'm Golf Lover UK. If you want to find Bob on Twitter, he is at BobBall PDX. That's Papa Delta X-Ray. At BobBall PDX. And go and have a look at his two tweets, his two main ones. And the first one being on the 6th of July, 2023, which is a message to all players of the PGA Tour. Bob, it was fantastically written. And thank you for joining us today. Take care.
It was my pleasure.